Hey everybody, Cameron here. EA Zoom meeting, November 29th. And today we're going to talk about astrology and holistic health. And as you see on the front screen, I have holistic health with a W. And I know a lot of people spell it with the H, but I always like to emphasize that W because it's really about the whole thing. You know, in this day and age, a lot of people are, kind of just getting into health, and the paradigm on what is healthy and what's not healthy is changing a lot. And I've been really tuned into that a lot lately, especially with the South Node in Capricorn and the North Node being in Cancer. Like going forward, I've been thinking a lot about like what is like nourishing and what's making us, feel safe, but not just like emotionally, but like a lot like in the body. So yeah, I'm just gonna start the slides. So I have two quotes here, just to start everything off. And here, Dr. Walter Russell says, "Thus I was made to see the universe as a whole in its simple principle as one unit, repeated over and over, endlessly and without variation, as evidence in the universal heartbeat to which every pulsing thing in the light wave universe is geared to act as one whole." I just thought that was a really great quote because that's kind of how my brain has been wired for the past few years since I've been, diving back into nature and into astrology and to health, into just everything, starting out with, even like my ascendant is Sagittarius, which is about seeing this, very higher mind perspective, or just high perspective, or it's like overviewing things, not necessarily higher is like better, but just higher as in seeing an overall picture of what's occurring. And then this quote here is from one of my main teachers, Sage Papam, and I love this quote. And he was talking about like the planets and in astrology when it comes to like the body and stuff like that. So I like to think of this understanding as really seeing the spiritual reflections of our organ systems and the archetypes that live within those parts of our body, and how so much of our healing journey is about coming into relationship with these archetypal forces, healing the archetypal forces within us, and ultimately trying to find our own balance and how we express the energies in a harmonious and healthy way. And even though in this talk, I'm not necessarily going to dive deeply into like the signs and the houses and so that stuff right there. I'm going to talk about the basic foundation of everything, because to me, we could talk about the planets, we could talk about the signs, we could talk about aspects, we could talk about how to figure out your constitution, but that's like doing algebra without starting out with like addition. So I thought I would just go all the way back to the very beginning and break it down, because that's how I like to see it. And that's truly the only way that we can actually see the whole, if we start out with the whole. Also, in this talk, like I haven't done that much research on like evolutionary astrology and its perspective on health, but I've really contemplated a lot about, the stages of consciousness in Pluto Volume 1 from Jeffrey Wolf Green. And I started just thinking about it like in like, regards to like health. And I haven't seen anybody talk about that. So I just thought it was interesting that there's these 4 stages. When it comes to the dimly evolved stage or the devolved stage, I didn't really put that much thought into it, to be honest, because to me, it's like the dimly evolved person, on some level, they are not having as much control over their environment or over choices that they can make when it comes to the food they have or the environment that they're in. So I kind of just, I honestly just didn't dive deeply into that. With the consensus, it's 75%. So when it comes to health, I just think of, what do most people think is healthy, right? I mean, it's actually kind of sad to me, because people look at boxes and they look at like calories, they look at, carbohydrates, protein, stuff like that. But real food doesn't really have labels on it. So 75% of people out there, you know, they're probably thinking being healthy is like reading labels and stuff like that a lot of times, because I work at a herb shop, and I see so many people who come in there, and I ask them like, well, how's your health? Or like, how are you eating? And they'll say, I'm eating good. And they'll say, I eat 3 times a day. And like, that's their perspective on health, that they're eating 3 times a day. So that's, you know, their health is well. Or also like, even just like thinking about it, like when I ask most people like, how is your sleep? And they say, I sleep good. And what they're really, most of the times I've been finding they're saying is like, I sleep for 7 hours, or I sleep for 6 hours, or I sleep for 5 hours. And then I ask them, how are you feeling when you wake up in the morning? And they're like, or they're like, oh, I just can't stand it, you know? And that's not sleeping well. So that's something that I've been like tuning into a lot. Because consensus, you know, even I really like saying it, it's like the herd state, because it's just like, I always think of it as like the picture where it's like most people are like walking forward, or like zombies moving forward, but then you have like 15 people who are all like looking over at each other, which to me that would be like the individuated state, or they're walking in the opposite direction. So, and then individuation is just like, to me, when I look at that and when it comes to health, is like people looking at it from a new perspective of not even just like, you know, people being vegan or taking the vegetarian diet approach. It's more like, what like do I as an individual need to be healthy? Like, do I need to eat more at night? Do I need to eat more by myself and alone? Do I need to eat and have music on while I'm listening to it? Do I need to eat one thing at a time? You know, all these things, that was what I think about when I think about individuation and when it comes to health. And also just like rejecting the social norms of like, we need a lot of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, or, you know, the newest diet that people say is good. It's like, actually, I'm going to just like check it out for myself and do what I feel like is best for me. And then when it comes to the spiritual state, man, I thought a lot about this as well. And for me, it automatically made me think of like people who are like breatharians, or people who are like fasting for long bouts of time. But also, for some reason, like it felt like maybe in the spiritual state as well, it's like maybe you just don't even worry about any of it. You just eat what you want when you want to, and maybe it's not a lot, but you're getting nourished from it. Reactions to evolutionary growth. This also is from EA, the EA perspective, but it having to do with health. I thought it was really interesting to look at it from that perspective. So the reactions to evolutionary growth, which I guess in this like particular context, I like framed it as like, I guess like when somebody's coming across like maybe a health issue, or, you know, the way that their lifestyle is going, that they see that it's not healthy for them, but they continue on that path. So there's a few responses that you can have to this. One is to resist evolutionary and karmic requirements altogether, which my perspective of karma is just like, it's your own doing, it's our own doing. It can be perceived as cause and effect, but I definitely don't like to think of it as like punishment versus reward, because that to me is, I don't know, I just don't like it. Yeah. So yeah, and that's one of the uncommon ones. To resist it altogether is considered uncommon for people to do. So if somebody has a health issue, they're gonna probably most likely pay attention, right? Maybe they won't make all the changes they need to, but they'll pay attention. The second one is to respond wholeheartedly and desire to understand what the lessons are for this life, and to go for it in a total non-resistant way. So that would be like, for me, like it would be like, if I ate something and it made me feel bad, I would just like throw it out, like completely. Or if I found some new knowledge about what health is about, then I drop everything and just move forward with that idea in particularly. which that also is considered uncommon. And even in those two, you can see one is just like resisting it completely, and then one is just like going all in, which is like not even balanced on some level. It's really just two extremes, which most people tend to oscillate between the two, which is the last one. It's willing to change, but still resisting some dynamics because you're afraid of, you know, what you don't know. You know, you're afraid that you're supposed to do this, or you're supposed to do that, or I've always eaten this way. If I don't eat this way, then I don't know what's going to happen, you know? And a lot of times we do put our security in like how we eat and things like that. So on to the transiting South Node in Capricorn. This is one of the things that really inspired me to look into this field and talk about it more. It's about taking responsibility for the past. And taking responsibility for the past in many, many ways. It's not just about like, you know, patriarchal conditioning. It's not about, you know, how rigid we've become through our society and lacking emotions. It's about our health and how we've been conditioned with that. And what things have we been told? The layers that have been put on top of us that have stripped away our own ability to respond. And I even said it just like that on purpose, because when I think about Capricorn, I think a lot about responsibility. And it's really about our ability to respond, not necessarily responsibility as in like, you're to blame for this, you're to blame for that. It's not really about that for me. It's about how am I going to respond to something? So I was raised in a house that I perceived as being pretty healthy, but there's some things that I learned that just weren't best for me. So it's like, how was I going to respond to that? Was I going to continue on doing what I was conditioned to do, or am I going to change it? You know? And the biggest thing that I see with that is this realization that I had. All right, it's not here. Okay, here's another quote from somebody that I've been reading a lot from, Arnold Earhart. He says, disease is an effort of the body to eliminate waste, mucus, and toxemias. And this system assists nature in the most perfect and natural way. Not disease, but the body is to be healed. It must be cleansed, freed from waste and foreign matter, from mucus and toxemias accumulated since childhood. You cannot buy health in a bottle. You cannot heal your body, that is. Cleanse your system in a few days. You must make compensation for the wrong you have done your body all during your life. My system is not a cure or a remedy. It is a regeneration, a thorough house cleaning, the acquisition of such clean and perfect health as you never knew before. And to me, that is right there. It's like talking about getting rid of the conditioning that you had, you know, with our body. Even I think about it too, is like, even as far as like conditioning from the past, I think a lot about like when I was being raised in a Baptist family, you know, a lot of times people talked about like the flesh, right? They talk about the flesh and how the flesh was, you know, on some level unpure. Like it was just not good. And over time, like through my observation, what I've seen is on some level, the flesh could be perceived as the victim based off of our actions. So the conditioning from the past as well, like I've been changing and I've been talking to a lot of people about it. I asked them, what is diet? You know, because you can ask somebody, what is your diet? And they're going to start talking about, you know, the food they eat, you know, and things like that. You know, a lot of people that I talk to, they automatically tell me what they don't eat as their diet. I guess they're thinking I'm going to judge them. I do have a lot of Capricorn, so it kind of makes sense on some level. But yeah, so these are the definitions that I found for what is diet. Food and drink regularly provided or consumed. Habitual nourishment, the kind and amount of food prescribed for a person or animal for a specific reason. And the last one is a regime of eating or drinking sparingly so as to reduce one's weight. So I thought this was really interesting because even at the top, you see it's very general: food and drink regularly provided or consumed. That's very general. In the last one, it has a very modern feel to it on like what we perceive as diet. Because if I ask somebody what their diet is, a lot of times it makes them automatically feel like they're about to be restricted or they're about to be judged. And it's about, it's limiting on some level, just the way we think of diets in our like daily lives in the modern day. So with diet, I choose to look at definition number 2. It's about habitual nourishment. And when it comes to nourishment, I do not limit that to food. I don't limit it to anything on some level, because I've even began incorporating in my diet like breathing, right? It's like, how much am I breathing and how much nourishment does that bring me? How much exercise am I having and how much nourishment does that bring me? How much reading, how much, anything that I'm intaking in my daily life that is of nourishment to me, I consider that to be part of my diet. So with all these ideas and concepts too, it's just an open invite for people to, awaken themselves to what is truly nourishing for them, which is about moving forward into Cancer. It's about moving toward more nourishing practices, and being receptive to what our stomach wants and needs, what we intuitively feel inside of ourselves, and understanding that the ego is not a problem. When it comes to our diets, a lot of times I feel like the way that we see ourselves is actually being connected to our diets. And that to me is just, I don't fully understand it on some level, but we need to understand that who we are inside and how we feel is not dependent on our diet. It's not dependent on necessarily our astrology sign. It's not really dependent on anything but how we're feeling in that moment and how we are guiding ourselves forward to being more nourished in every moment. And it's also about coming home. So with holistic health, to me, moving forward with Cancer is about going home, going back home. And you can see here in this chart, it's all about what we're like, what humans or what animals are made to eat certain things. So if you take a look at all the categories here, you have the certain things that make a carnivore, the certain things that make an omnivore, or a frugivore. And if you look at the list for human and you look at the list for frugivore, those two are so compatible. They're pretty much the same thing. I mean, there is no difference on some level. So just, with the understanding, and it's like, to me, it's not about judging something at all. It's about seeing it clearly and objectively. We categorize all these things. Carnivores are like this, omnivores are like this, herbivores are like this, frugivores are like this, and humans actually fit in that category. And it's not about which right or wrong, like I said before, because a lot of people have taken health that way, in that direction. It's about natural law. Even thinking about Jupiter going in Sagittarius, it's like the beliefs don't need to necessarily be there anymore for me. It's not really about believing, it's about just expanding into natural law and living in that truth in every single moment. So yeah, I invite everybody who's either on the talk now or listening later to come back to this chart and just, meditate on it. Just meditate on it. Not asking anybody to change their diet, not asking anybody to do anything besides just observe and meditate on, what I see is natural law. It's natural that we eat fruit, Even thinking of, like I look at the elemental model a lot and I work with plant medicine. So when I think of plants, I think of just elements. Yeah. So the earth is roots, and water is the stem, and air is the leaves, and fire is the flower, but the ether is the fruit, in the seed. And to me, it says something about being a human, you know, and the responsibility and consciousness that we have. You know, it is getting closer to being more etheric than what I would call lower species, not lower as in a value judgment or saying that they're worse, but just lower in, you know, in consciousness on some level. This is another thing that I see in holistic health. I like looking at things from an alchemical perspective. And this quote right here says, "Salve et coagula." So it's about separating things, but only separating things to recombine them. So no element, planet, zodiac sign, chakra, organ system, or human function is in isolation. Remember that if we take things apart, we have to recombine them so that we can like truly understand the unity of it. And that goes back to like how I was saying that it's not even necessarily about me talking about a zodiac sign today or me talking about the planets today, because we have to understand from a holistic perspective. And there's some things that I feel like we need to go back and decondition before we can even move forward to say things like we're using holistic health in astrology. So when it comes to wholeness, actually before I start this, the model I'm about to use right now, it's called the doctrine of emanation. So it's pretty much how, you know, things came to be. And it's in almost every single system that you see. And it comes in a variety of forms, but even astrology in and of itself, I have seen it being shown through this model, you know. And I'll talk about that more as I go. So in the beginning, you have the oneness. There's many names for it. Some people call it the light of nature. Some people call it source. Some people call it God, the universe. In alchemy, they call it the prima materia. Some people call it chaos, because if we in human form even tried to conceptualize it, or if we actually tried to understand it, we would just lose it, you know? It would just be pure chaos. Some people also call it the all and the nothing. It's where duality doesn't exist, because all is all and nothing is nothing. And from there, we have polarity. So to me, that's like, let there be light happen, you know? And in polarity, it creates yin and yang. It creates duality. That can be seen as masculine and feminine. It can be seen as magnetic and electric. It can be seen in the human body as alkaline versus acid. It can be seen within an organ system as a deficiency or an excess. In Ayurvedic medicine, they talk about in the beginning as prakruti, which is like what was there, and then purusha, which is like what's animating what is there. So you could even see that as like the prakruti, or like it could be like yin energy, where it's just form. And until you have an animating factor, which is purusha or yang, then it's just there. So it's like you just have the yin form, but the yang is the spark, and it's what's making it move. So down and out is also the energy of polarity, which I use for like yin. When I think of yin, I think of something being receptive. It's down and in. And when I think of masculine yang energy, I think of up and out. And in alchemy, they call it celestial salt and celestial niter. Also, the reason why I put all these different categories here is just so we can see the wholeness, because for me, it's really just all about wholeness. And in astrology, I always tell people, even going back to the oneness, a lot of times I tell them like the chart is one whole thing, and we always have to remember that no matter what. And from there, we have duality. So it's like even in Aries, we have yang, and then in Taurus, we have yin, and it keeps going, oscillating back and forth between those two things. So that is the polarity within astrology. And then from that, from the one came the two, and from the two, there broke off two more from each side. That's how it is in the doctrine of emanation. And it goes, earth and water came from the yin. Those two broke off from the yin. And then air and fire came from the yang. And the way I look at the elements when it comes to health, I just look at the body, like how nourished the body is will be shown through the mobility of the body. How the water element is just how the lymphatic system is flowing. The air element is like the neurotransmitters and the communication of the nervous system, or you can even think of it as just nervous system flow. And then the fire is how the prana or the life force is moving through the vessel. And I'll break that down a little more, but that was just how I see the elements in a very like broad, holistic sense when it comes to humans and health. And always remembering that within your birth chart, if you have an excess or deficiency in any of these, see how that could apply. So with Earth, like I was saying before, its polarity is yin. And within the body, it creates many things. So as far as like health goes, within our tissue states, it can cause coldness. Within our psychological well-being, that earth energy, if it's in excess or if it's out of balance, it can cause like a depression, right? Because even thinking about if something's cold, it is being like forced down and in, like I was saying before, to down and in yin energy. It's like it becomes depressed. It's just like it feels trapped, like it can't move. It's like we even shiver when that happens. And then also it can create damp stagnation. If there's too much earthly energy, it could just be stuckness, you know? We could think of that as the environment, like an environment, you know? When it's cold and depressed outside, you know, you could just think of literally like in the middle of the winter time when all the leaves fall off the tree, it's like it's cold and depressed, and honestly, like even the tissue states can be like dying away, like wasting away from cold depression or damp stagnation. Also, the earth element, based off of Carl Jung, is sensation. So when it comes to our health and well-being, you know, do we have a lot of earth in our chart? Are we a very earthly person? Because if we are, something about our well-being is going to be very important to be in touch with our senses. Also, taking into consideration the influences of our external environment is super important. So the nighttime and wintertime, that has direct correspondence to the earth element. So it's really important to, if we're trying to cultivate, you know, holistic health, if we have a deficiency in earth, it's like, are we being still and receptive? And like, right, that's the cold energy. It's like more about down and in, being still. And it's like the yin energy is like about being receptive, you know, in the nighttime, in the winter time. How are we feeling when those energies are present? Do we feel like they're overwhelming? And if they are overwhelming, is it because we have too much of it in us or not enough in us? And back to sensation and touch. So sensation and touch, they're kind of like the same thing on some level, but touch here is just about the actual, like one of the five senses. So each element has a sense, and this sense is touch. And with the earth element, I talk to people a lot of times about strength training because, you know, a lot of times with a deficiency in earth, I see a lot of people who like have a wasting away type of energy. A lot of times it's just like their function is not, it's like very, it's just depressed. So with the water element, it's another yin sign, or not a yin sign, but a yin element. And here again, we have damp stagnation, but we also here have damp relaxation. And we could think about that in the tissue states, or again, we could think about that in somebody's emotions or even psychological well-being. So the damp stagnation, like if we think of that within a body, we can think of, let's say, we take the energy of damp stagnation and we put it into somebody's calf muscle. That's like a bunch of fluids just built up in their calves. And if you take damp relaxation, you could take it and put it in the same place, and that's a bunch of fluids in the calves, but it's like spilling out. So that could be like varicose veins, because the tissue state of the actual veins get swell up and damp, and then they just like float out everywhere. And a lot of times I've found a deep correspondence for people who actually feel that way inside themselves, or they like actually are that way in just life in and of itself, and seeing that there's no separation between those two things. Because I've had a lot of people come into where I work at, because where I work, people come in, you know, I can ask them their zodiac sign, ask them a few questions. I don't have a lot of time with them. So I've had a lot of experience with just like one-off people coming in, seeing them, and then leaving. And so many times that people have this very watery nature, I'll ask them, have you ever had trouble with varicose veins? And a lot of the times they do have issues with that. And they also have issues with like holding strong to their emotions, or, you know, containing all the feelings that they have, you know. And this is the feeling nature. And that's in Carl Jung's archetypes. It's 4 types. It's the feeling nature. So it's just like people, to me, a lot of times too, feeling can be very like intuitive. They just feel so much that it's overwhelming. And you can even go back to the tissue state in that. If you feel so much that you get filled up, then it's just like all this emotion, and there's really nowhere for it to go. But it could also be like there's all this feeling, and you get the damp relaxation where it's like you're just spilling out everywhere, and, you know, it happens. So also this corresponds to like dawn, or like the sun setting in the fall season. During those times, how do you feel? How can you connect to the water element? Because it's super important, and it helps awaken us to how that is in our actual like being. Water corresponds to taste, and I look at that as just, yeah, I mean, even like with our emotions, we always want to move towards like sweets when we're feeling things. Like that's just a perfect example right there in and of itself. And when it comes to the water element, at the bottom of each column, I've written like, you know, how to exercise that element, and I think of it as like conscious movement and also like flexibility, right? Because myself having like a lot of planets in Capricorn, I tended towards rigidity. And so when I would feel something, I began to just like, you know, even like put on a song that makes you feel the emotion that you're feeling, and interpretive dance that and see how that feels. Even people who have perceived themselves as overly emotional, I've done this with them. I've told them, go put on a song that makes you feel how you feel, and interpret that with your body and see how that makes you feel. And I found great results with that. So the next element, which is the first yang element or masculine element, is air. So with the air element, a lot of times people say the energetics of it are warm and moist, but I tend to look towards wind tension and dry atrophy, because, and this is in tissue states. Yeah, because that's just what I tend to see from people who have a lot of air element in their chart. And also the air is like that. It's just, it can make you tense, you know, if like, let's say the wind is hitting you, and it just gives you that sense of tension. Even like the air hitting rock, you know, over time, it just like withers it down, which would create the dry atrophy tissue state within a person's body, like actual physical body. And it tends to be psychological for sure. And Carl Jung's 4 types, you have the thinking type, which is just people who think a lot, you know, or it tends to be more logical oriented, left brain oriented. And in the air element corresponds to the morning and springtime, which is like where everything is rising up. Even if you look at the symbol right there for air, it's like the energy is rising up, but there's a limit to it. And you can even look at these other signs and see that as well with the earth. you know, it's all the way down and it's not going any further down. And then with water, it's like everything, the energy is like descending. So with the air element, the one of the senses is smell. And that goes to breathing. To me, it always makes me think of breathing and how breathing goes with even the wind tension state, because a lot of times it has to do with the nervous system. The air element corresponds to the nervous system. So the scent that we have in our nose, even like thinking of like smelling like essential oils like lavender and stuff like that. And the exercise that goes with this is breathing techniques. So if you feel like you're out of balance with the air element, you can always look towards breathing techniques to remedy that. So now to the fire. Fire is like the most unadulterated yang energy that there is. I mean, if it's in balance, of course it won't be unadulterated on some level, but fire is the most yang that we have. In the tissue state for fire is heat excitation and dry atrophy as well. But the heat excitation comes first. So when we're thinking of heat and excitation, we can think of that as, you know, heat as in like literally like you're burning up and you're getting sunburned. But you can, like, that's why we always put the slash and put excitation, because if you take the fire element and you put it into somebody's heart and it's out of balance, then you know, it's like you're not necessarily going to say you have a hot heart. I mean, some people say they have heartburn and consider that to be heat, but you can even think of like the excitation. It's just like excitation in the heart. That's like having like a heart palpitation. Or it's like even thinking of like fire is just not in the body as well, but it's like you can take the energy of a child and that's like the fire element, because it's like has so much excitement and passion for what's happening, and you could put that in your thoughts and what is happening when you have too many thoughts like that. You know, it's unnerving and it's depleting on some level, which can cause the dry atrophy tissue state, which is just like a withering away from too much usage or not enough usage. So in Carl Jung's model of the four types is instinctual, which is not necessarily, actually, I wrote that wrong. Actually, it's intuitive. It's actually called intuitive in Carl Jung's model of the four types, but I consider it as instinctual, because when we're unhindered, I think of it more as like the unadulterated energy of Aries, you know, because when we have that come through us, we just do it. And that goes back to fire being unadulterated yang energy. It's like very instinctual, but they call it intuitive in his model. And also it corresponds to noon or midday or the hottest time of the day. And it also corresponds to summer. What you see with the element of fire is just, it's like the highest of high energy, just continuously rising, the heat just rising. And it has to do with sight, because our circulation is about the fire element. And if we have good circulation, then the heat allows us to see, but it also could be out of balance, and it causes a deficiency to eyesight as well. And with fire, I put cardio exercises. So that's like making sure that our heart is like very active and beating really well, you know, within a balanced way. Because I know a lot of people tend to look at cardio and they like emphasize it a lot, but you have to keep it in consideration with all the other things as well, with the strength training or the, you know, the mobility and the flexibility of the body and the breathing techniques as well. So from the oneness, we broke off into the two, which was the polarity. And then from the two, we broke off into four, which you all know in astrology, we have the earth signs, the water signs, the air signs, and the fire signs. So whatever you have in your chart, just make sure you tune into that frequency, and not just the frequency within you, but the frequency in your environment, and seeing how those things have an influence on you. On some level, this talk isn't even necessarily about diagnosing things through astrology. It's about tuning into the, you know, the ABCs of the energy within your chart and allowing that to awaken you so you can evolve and understand what your unique constitution is, or your unique way of being, or what you need to do to bring yourself back into balance or to harmony. So from the four, they recombine. So like I was saying before, in the beginning, it's called solve et coagula, and that is about taking things apart and recombining them. So we went from 1 to 2 to 4, and from the 4, you have the earth and the water, and those two come together, and that would like make the fixed energy. And then you have the fire and the water, and you put those together, and that would make like the cardinal energy. And then you take the fire and the air, and you put that together, and that would make like the mutable energy. In alchemy, cardinal is considered to be what they call sulfur. In Ayurvedic medicine, they call it pitta. And in yogic and Ayurvedic traditions as well, they call it rajas. Fixed is salt in alchemy, it's kapha in Ayurvedic medicine, and it's tamas as well. In alchemy, they call the sulfur, the salt, and the mercury, they call it just the 3 principles. In Ayurveda, they call pitta, kapha, and vata, they call those the doshas. And then rajas, tamas, and sattva, those are called gunas. So just inviting people to see, like, they're not necessarily exactly the same thing, but if you look at all these things from a holistic perspective and for their respective traditions, they are the same at a very like fundamental level. Like the essence of them are pretty much the same thing, is what I found. So yeah, and then mutable would be Mercury in alchemy, and then it would be, and not Mercury like the planet Mercury, but it's a principle. So you can even see that as spirit. And you could see fixed as your body, and then you could see cardinal as like the soul. So yeah, mutable, Mercury. In Ayurveda, it's called Vata. It's the Vata dosha. And then the Sattva is the guna that corresponds to it. So with cardinal things, which I chose to put Pitta up there because it corresponds to a dosha, which I find for like health reasons, it corresponds really nicely, and it's a good to go look at it to like cross-reference and try to see a larger picture of what's going on. So cardinal, if you have a lot of cardinal energy, especially when it comes to like health, it's an acute symptom. So it's something that kind of just comes up, or you can even see it as like a symptom that is being initiated, just like the cardinal energy. It can happen like really, really fast. And a lot of times people who are very decisive tend to get this type of symptom. It's like very like something, you do something and then you get a repercussion from it, and it happens like very quickly. With the fixed mode, that tends to be more of a chronic symptom. So even we can take a step back and go back to cardinal and see that what we're initiating, you know, we can continuously initiate it, right? And even like the seasons, you initiate a season, and after that is initiated for so long, it becomes fixed. It becomes more of a chronic thing. So with the fixed mode, if you have a lot of fixed energy, or yeah, if the issue that you're having is in a fixed sign, then you know the symptom can be chronic. And also, like I say, it's just slow, and slow not as in like, how do I want to say this? Anyway, okay, so slow, it could be more like it's happening over time, slowly, just like chronic. You can just look at it like that. And it's also something that's sustained. So even if you look at it from a positive perspective, and fixed could be like you fixed what you're doing and you know how to do it. So you're just sustaining yourself moving forward. And through that sustaining, it can be concentrated as well. So concentrated could be good, as in like you're focused because you know what you have to do when you're sustaining it, but it also could be concentrated where it's like all of the issues that are happening are going into one spot and it becomes chronic. Immutable tends to have symptoms that come and go. They're like very meandering, you know, it's just like very over here, over there, you know. Even like if you think of the end of a season, it kind of is like showing the next season, but it's not, and it's just like coming and going. Also, at the changes of seasons is a lot of times when actually people get colds or flus or kind of get sick. It's that mutable energy. It's like, are we adaptive or not? Because things are coming and going and fluctuating, and it's important to be adaptable. So a lot of times too, with the mutable seasons, it shows us how adaptable we really are. And it's also dispersing energy. So from the fixed energy, it's kind of like going away. So we can even look at actually creating symptoms from that perspective. So with cardinal, we start something through our actions, and through those actions, we crystallize something or we get something that's fixed. And if we stay stubborn in that, we might just stay in that forever. And if we do, then the mutability of it is like the withering away of it. It's like we will wither away because what we have that's chronic is basically causing us to waste away. Or we can be adaptable and change so we can fix the issue. So with the modes in health, I thought this was like one of the most important things that I found, because in our society, we tend to focus on certain things, and I feel like the essence of them is being missed. So with the cardinal energy, I corresponded to proteins and amino acids. So everybody's heard about proteins. You know, a lot of people like are proponents of like being on a high protein diet and stuff like that, but not realizing a holistic vision of the human body. When the human body gets proteins, what does it do? It takes the proteins and it rips it apart. It rips it apart and it gets all the things from it that it can actually utilize, which a lot of times would go to amino acids. With fat is the fixed element. So from fat, we take that apart and we get fatty acids. In mutable, I put as carbohydrates and sugar. So whenever, you know, people talk about high carb diets, low carb diets, and carbohydrates are just complex sugars. So being mindful that, yes, we can just get to the essence of it. Whenever we get fat, carbohydrates, and proteins, we have to rip those things apart to get the essence of what we're really looking for. And that just goes back to like my main focus being about like deconditioning from the past of like the way we used to see things, because it wasn't necessarily so. Also with the judgment of things of like sugar, you know, or fat. For a long time, avocado wasn't even considered good because fat was a bad thing, you know. And now a lot of people say sugar is a bad thing, which if you even like going back to the chart of humans being actually anatomically created to eat mostly fruit, you know, how could sugar be a bad thing? Okay, yeah, so going into that, let's learn sugar is to begin with. Yeah, so sugar is so important within our diets. Like even right here, I was talking about how sugar is part of our DNA, like it's in our DNA. So people think bad things about sugar, but I don't really think sugar is the problem at all. I think eating fake food is the problem, honestly. But just going back to really just the overall generalized theme of what I'm talking about here is about breaking everything down to its essence and seeing things from multiple perspectives and layers before you start going into like the depth of the planets or the signs and houses and stuff like that. So the last thing here I have is they're called the 20 qualities. So this is pretty much like going back to the polarity of things. So it's just about how are we going to, you know, not necessarily categorize ourselves, but see how, like, what qualities that we have in our life, whether it's in our environment, whether it's how we talk, whether it's what we're eating. It's just the things that we're engaging in. Going back to the modes, these could correspond to each mode. And if you look at the doshas, these are what the doshas are really made up of. So from my perspective, on some level, this is like all these qualities are what the modes are made up of. So each mode is going to be heavy or light, slow or sharp, hot or cold, oily or dry, smooth or rough, dense or liquid, soft or hard, static or mobile, gross or subtle, cloudy and clear. And this is an open invitation for everybody to go back to the modes and actually tap into what they really are, like as an energetic force. Right? We all know, right? Like fixed would be heavy, fixed would be oily, and cardinal would be hot. But what would cardinal be as far as subtle or gross or cloudy or clear? Because to define those things or to realize what they really are is to actually find the essence of what those energetics are. So that could help us deepen our understanding and what the modes really are. And that can help us with our understanding of the signs, since these are the components of the signs. Yeah, so that's pretty much the ending of this talk. I'm super interested to see if anybody has any questions, because that's a lot of new information, I feel like, or a different perspective that I don't know if it's quite been presented. So yeah, just opening up for any questions if anybody has any.
Yes, thank you, Cameron. I loved it. It's fantastic. Lots of great information. What about sugar? Like you did mention, towards the end there, but are you talking about the natural sugar found in fruits or actually white sugar?
Right. So when it comes to sugar, to me, I always tell people, let's just open up the spectrum on it, right? So we have sugars, and also understanding that like carbohydrates, when we say carbohydrates, we tend to not even say sugar, but just understanding it's complex sugar. So always saying when we think carbohydrates, think complex sugar. But when it comes to sugar, yeah, I'm talking about natural sugars, not like refined white sugars for sure. Because those two things, they have different actual like compositions. They're made up differently. And just going back to like natural law and what is natural law? Like is it in natural law to have white sugars or processed sugars? Because through natural law, we can see that things grow and they have sugar in them, and there's inherently nothing wrong with it, especially since our bodies are made to digest that. Glucose is super important within our body. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Oh, yeah, that's great. Just another quick question, and then Della has got a question after me.
okay.
What about when you're craving something like, for example, fruit? Like you just really want to eat mangoes and watermelons and, but then
Yeah.
but then you get like a reaction, like, maybe an allergic reaction. So you've got one desire conflicting with another. What do you think?
Right. So with that, like, it's really interesting because to me, we tend, and that even a lot of times like goes back to like blaming things. A lot of times it's like we will eat fruit, and then especially like people, I've seen it with people who have like either like getting closer to having diabetes and things like that. They'll say, I can't eat fruit because it has sugar in it. And it's really our body's ability to metabolize the sugar is what the issue is a lot of times. And it's also like if we eat a lot of fruit, it can cause symptoms, or our body is just not ready to metabolize sugar like it once was. So a lot of times, yeah, it gets tricky. It depends is what I really feel. Or to me, it's like I want to say I know, but I don't want to be that hubris. But I definitely see that like through where people are in their health, sometimes they can't metabolize sugar because of what state their body is in. But that doesn't mean that they can't one day if they like clean their body out. Because to me, a lot of it's about the lymphatic system and the adrenal glands. And yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
Oh, yeah, that was excellent. Thank you. Della, go ahead. Unmute.
Okay, I did it. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah, you're unmuted.
So my question, I have all 4 elements equally in my chart, completely balanced.
Oh, nice.
So
Okay.
that's my question.
Oh, that's your question. Okay. Your question is your about like, so, I mean, to me, first off, whenever it comes to assessing things, especially within ourselves, if we have things like that that seem conflicting, then on some level, I feel that we're really just conflicted in our head, because we can drop into our heart, feel into our body, and see how we feel. Like, do you have symptoms that would seem more earthy, or do you have symptoms that could seem more watery or air element? Which to me, a lot of people who like have a balance of energy, they tend more towards the air element, just because of the society we live in, where it's like hyperactive, and the nervous systems are like very like, yes, a lot of times our nervous system can go into excess. It's even, to me, I always look at it as like, we live in a masculine dominant society. So the fire in the air element tend to exhaust people, and then they'll think that they need stimulants, but they actually have used up all their energy already. I don't know if that answers your question, but really, to me, at the end of the day, it's about dropping into your heart, feeling into your body, because all of these are just tools of seeing what is holistic. But we can really just observe nature and understand that we're part of nature, and see what our nature is, or think about the things that we've done to take us outside of our own nature.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's helpful.
But also in the chart, there is a way of looking at it, because the sun sign. A lot of times people look to the sun sign. If it's a day chart, a lot of people do day charts or night charts. If it's a sun sign in a day chart, then people look to that a lot of times. If it's a moon sign in a night chart, then people look to the moon, or people look to the ascendant in the ruler. But there's multiple ways that people look at it, and I didn't really go into that, so I didn't want to go in depth about it. But there's many ways to go about it for sure.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. So any final questions?
I just wanted to say, oh, go ahead, Russ.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I just want to say hey, and that I really related to the idea of how humans are frugivores. I eat a lot of fruit, and I wanted to also share some research that I did about the definition of frugivore is someone who, or fruit, roots, nuts, seeds. A lot of frugivores eat insects also, which is kind of interesting, and that's an omnivore characteristic too.
Yeah.
But and vegetables, flowers, leaves, herbs, all kinds of things. But just wanted to share that I think those are very healthy things to eat.
Yeah, most definitely, and I agree totally. And a lot of times too, so even to just for everybody to keep in perspective of, a lot of times, like when I work with people, I'm working on getting them back to health a lot of times. So like when I talk about eating fruits, and you could probably feel it like through my being, and I'm like, yeah, eat fruit, but it's not necessarily like that. It's other things you can eat. You can eat anything, obviously, but it's like when we're trying to get back to health, a lot of times fruit is the easiest thing on our digestive system. And all these things are about like making everything back to its like simplistic essence, and that's even like when I was talking about the North Node in Cancer. It's about remembering the mother and going back home to where we really are naturally.
Yeah, I also could share that I've also gone on the excess with fruit before too, where I was not getting nutrition from other things, because if you're eating a lot of fruit, you might not have a whole lot of energy.
Right. I mean, I have a very unique perspective on that, and if anybody wants to contact me, you're welcome to do it. But yeah, the way I look at that, when you have like low vitality after you eat a lot of fruit, I don't necessarily look at it as lacking nourishment. I look at that as kind of like on some level a healing crisis. you know, a lot of times people, when they have a healing crisis, we think of like things that are extreme, like maybe like throwing up, maybe having to go to the bathroom a lot. But if we're actually over time eating a lot of fruit, sometimes, you know, there has been people who literally like their gums have like had actually like corroded away on some level and then came back. It was like the body's way of like regenerating itself. To me, it's just like the healing crisis is just like Scorpio energy, you know. It's like we look at it and it was like we would be afraid of it dying, but really what it's doing is dying to regenerate itself.
Okay, thank you, Ross. And our last question from Kimberly. Go ahead.
Hey, Cameron, that was awesome. I loved it. I love how you talked about the nodes, and I was thinking that it would be really helpful to plan ahead because, you know, if you have big transits coming up, to make sure that you are paying attention to those activities that you talked about. If you know you're going to be hit by, you know, Uranus transit or something like that, that would be really helpful to prepare in advance to make sure you're looking at it holistically. I like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've definitely been looking. Well, I'm like very self-oriented on some level, but yeah, like even my transit right now, like I have Saturn in my first house, and I have a stellium in that house in Capricorn. So I definitely tune into that frequency, and I haven't necessarily. I don't know if you were necessarily referring to like just like the overall like what is happening for like the dynamics of health with everybody. I haven't necessarily got into that, but I definitely will tune into what you just said, like, because I feel like I feel that on like multiple levels, just the way you said it. I really appreciate that.
Okay, Cameron, thank you. That brings us to the end of your meeting, and we all got so much out of it. Thank you so much. Would you all please thank Cameron Allen, everyone?
Thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely great.